concluded that the Prime Minister's advice to Her Majesty was unlawful, void, and of no effect. This means that the order in Council to which it led was also unlawful, void, and of no effect, and should be quashed. This is the unanimous judgment of all 11 justices.
Because I know that inward investment will mean better jobs right across the country. Since we've been in power, we've brought in over £60 billion of investment from around the world. That's a record sum of money, and therefore that for me is vindication that the approach that we're taking to the economy, which is to stabilise it, to be strategic and long-term in our decision making, is the very thing that investors care about most.
Well, first of all, I mean, how naive, how stupid do these politicians think we are? The answer is a resounding...
The verdict that shook a nation, a prime minister exposed and a government in freefall. Let's not sugarcoat it. What you just witnessed is not some minor political hiccup or a footnote in legal history. It's a seismic moment. A bombshell ruling that ripped the mask off a prime minister who thought he could bypass the constitution, sidestep democracy, and pull the wool over the eyes of the British people. But justice, real, unfiltered, unanimous justice, struck back. All 11 justices. Let that sink in. Not a single dissenting voice. Not one. 11 of the country's highest legal minds stood shoulder to shoulder and declared the Prime Minister's advice to Her Majesty was unlawful, void, and of no effect. That's not legal jargon. That's a judicial nuclear strike. So, what does it actually mean? It means the Prime Minister, your Prime Minister, gave advice to the monarch that was illegitimate. It means the actions that flowed from that advice, the order in council, must be erased from legal existence. It never should have happened. It was a lie cloaked in legality. But here's the kicker. While the Supreme Court delivers this thunderous judgment, Starmer dares to talk about £60 billion in foreign investment. He expects applause. Vindication, he calls it. Stabilization. Strategy. As if tossing around a few £billion figures is enough to distract us from the constitutional car crash he's just orchestrated. Do they really think we're that gullible? Starmer's government seems to believe that British citizens are too distracted, too worn down, too tired to care. They believe that we'll swallow their PR lines, nod along to their strategic plans, and forget that the very foundations of our democracy have just been declared unlawfully breached. But you're watching. You're awake. And you know this is not normal. This is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, not some junior backbencher. The man who promised stability and respect for institutions has just been found to have acted outside the law, against the Constitution, and without proper authority. This isn't a misstep. It's a national scandal. And the arrogance doesn't stop there. He stands before cameras and touts record investment figures like they're medals of honor. As if money from abroad somehow sanitizes corruption at home. £60 billion, he boasts. But what good is foreign investment when domestic trust is in tatters? What comfort is economic growth if it's built on institutional decay? And what kind of leader celebrates GDP while trampling over the very rules that define our democracy? Ask yourself this. Would you get away with breaking the rules at your job? Would you be applauded for bringing in new clients if you just committed a breach so serious that your entire authority was nullified? Would your manager say well done, or would they say you're fired? And yet here we are, with a Prime Minister who acts like a salesman, not a statesman. One who spins figures, avoids accountability, and counts on your silence. But silence is not what's happening now. The judgment is clear. The law is clear. The outrage is building. And every time Starmer opens his mouth to deflect, dismiss, or distract, the fury only grows louder. This isn't just about one decision. It's about the character of leadership. It's about whether we have a government that respects the rule of law or one that believes it's above it. And if you're still watching, still thinking, still questioning, then you're already part of the solution. Because here's what they fear the most: an informed, alert, and vocal public. They fear your ability to see through the talking points, to demand better, and to hold power to account. You've seen the evidence. You've heard the verdict. Now, ask yourself, what kind of country do we want to live in? One where justice is loud but ignored? Or one where justice sparks change? The battle isn't over, it's only just begun. The Prime Minister has been exposed. The foundations are cracking. The government's authority is no longer unquestioned. So here's the question they don't want you to ask. If this is what they tried to do behind closed doors, what else are they hiding? Stay sharp. Stay skeptical. And whatever you do, don't look away. If you're ready to dive deeper into this unfolding political earthquake, leave your thoughts in the comments, share this with those who still believe in accountability, and make sure to subscribe. Because this isn't over. Not by a long shot. And trust me, what comes next might shake Westminster to its core.
Is that while the present is already worse than the past, the future looks set to be even worse. Now today, Labour Chancellor Rachel Reeves issued her emergency budget, a panic move because she was on the brink of breaking her own fiscal rules. And while she's facing criticism for cutting public services and losing control of the public finances, there is a much bigger picture being missed here. We have 170,000 more civil servants on the payroll than we did in 2016, all of whom, by the way, are being paid for by you, the British taxpayer. Our welfare spending has been going up and is now projected to surpass £360 billion a year by 2028-29.
The future is worse than the present, and the present is a nightmare, inside Labour's emergency budget meltdown. Did you feel that? That wasn't just another dull budget announcement. What we just witnessed from Rachel Reeves was nothing short of a code red moment for the British economy. And if you walked away thinking, wait, what just happened? You're not alone. Because beneath the polished speech and desperate spin lies a chilling reality that should terrify every single taxpayer in the country. The future looks worse than the past. Yes, you heard that right. Not only is today already worse than yesterday, tomorrow is set to be a full-blown disaster. And Reeves knows it. A budget born of panic. Today, Labour's Chancellor Rachel Reeves unleashed her so-called emergency budget. But let's not dress it up with euphemisms. This wasn't a bold economic vision. This wasn't careful planning. This was panic with a PowerPoint. She was on the verge of breaking her own fiscal rules. Think about that. Labour built its entire credibility on being the grown-ups of public finances, and now, barely months into government, they've already lost control. And they're scrambling. But it gets worse. Because while Reeves faces growing criticism for slashing public services and presiding over the collapse of economic discipline, the real horror lies in what's being swept under the rug. 170,000 civil servants, and you are paying for every single one. Let's crunch the numbers together, shall we? Since 2016, the number of civil servants on the government payroll has ballooned by 170,000. That's the population of a small city, now working for the state. And guess what? You're footing the bill. Every one of those salaries, pensions, and perks comes from your taxes. While your local surgery is understaffed, while your trains barely run, and your children's schools are falling apart, the government has quietly expanded itself into an unmanageable bureaucratic behemoth. Why? To create jobs? Or to create loyal foot soldiers for a bloated political machine that's spiraling out of control? You decide. Welfare spending is exploding, and no one's stopping it. Now brace yourself for this one. By 2028 to 29, welfare spending is projected to surpass £360 billion per year. That's not just unsustainable. That's a death sentence for the public purse. It means less money for hospitals, roads, police, defense, education, you name it. And don't be fooled by Reeves's tone of fiscal responsibility. She's not making tough choices. She's making reckless ones. The so-called emergency budget wasn't a blueprint for recovery. It was a desperate attempt to delay the collapse. Welfare keeps rising. Public services keep crumbling. And what does Labour do? They grow the state. Because in their eyes, more government equals more control. But in reality, it's more debt, more inefficiency, and more betrayal of the hard-working Britons who believed they were voting for change. The big picture, it's not just a budget. It's a warning. Here's the truth no one in Westminster wants to say out loud. This isn't a cost of living crisis. This is a governance crisis. It's not just that public finances are off track. It's that those holding the wheel are driving straight into a brick wall, with your savings, your services, and your future riding in the back seat. And what do they offer in return? A few talking points, a staged speech, and promises they have no way of keeping. Because when the Chancellor of the Exchequer delivers a budget that cuts public services while hiring more bureaucrats, that's not leadership. That's madness. Ask yourself, How can they justify cutting frontline services while increasing government jobs? Why are taxpayers being squeezed while state dependency skyrockets? Where is the money really going? These are not abstract questions. These are the ones you must ask when you can't get a GP appointment, when your local high street shuts down, when your electricity bill doubles, and the Chancellor says, "Trust us, we have a plan." They don't. They're making it up as they go. And while they fumble in the dark, the economy burns. It doesn't have to be this way. There is another path. But first, we need to wake up. Because this isn't just a Labour problem. It's a systemic rot that spread across decades and parties. But now, under Reeves and Starmer, it's gone into overdrive. Big state. Big debt. Big disappointment. That's the future they're laying at your feet and telling you to be grateful for it. But are you? Are you really prepared to watch your country sink further into decline while the political class congratulates itself for managing the disaster it created? Because unless something changes, that's exactly what's going to happen. The takeaway. This emergency budget should terrify you. Not because of what it said, but because of what it means. The present is already bleak. The future is set to be worse. And the people in charge have no idea how to fix it. You've seen the numbers. You've heard the spin. And now you know the truth. So don't stay silent. Talk about it. Share it. Demand answers. Because when a government starts collapsing under its own weight, the only thing that can stop it is you. This is your money. Your services. Your country. And the time to take it back is now. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you feel more secure with Labour's budget? Or do you see this as a turning point? Make sure to subscribe for more breakdowns like this, because if this is what they're doing now, imagine what's coming next.
Welfare, big state, big net zero, big immigration economy that's making us poorer and pushing us into managed decline. And this isn't just about the economy either. When people are asked who will lower immigration, who will stop the small boats, who will reduce crime, the most popular answer today is not Labour, it's not the Conservatives, it's none of them. There is a widespread feeling among the British people that they are now trapped in a flimsy, disintegrating boat on stormy seas with no captain and surrounded by enormous, terrifying waves. It's a sense that nobody in power really knows what they're doing anymore, that nobody's even bothering to listen.
The British nightmare, net zero, mass immigration, and an economy in managed decline, who's really in charge? Let's not pretend anymore. Let's stop acting like this is business as usual. Because what we're living through right now isn't politics, it's a slow-motion national collapse, and the evidence couldn't be clearer. You've just watched it for yourself. Not from a fringe commentator. Not from some anonymous blog. But from the very words echoing through the country, words that paint a chilling, undeniable picture. Big net zero. Big immigration. A failing economy. A people abandoned. A government adrift. This is the reality. And it's getting harder and harder to ignore. A system that's making US poorer, on purpose. Let's start with the truth that too many in Westminster refuse to say out loud. The economy isn't failing by accident. It's being managed into decline. Yes, you read that correctly. We're not facing unforeseen turbulence. We're not victims of circumstance. We're passengers on a sinking ship, guided by captains who don't know what they're doing, or worse, don't care. What used to be a thriving, independent, industrious nation has been turned into a dependent, fragile, overregulated mess. All in the name of progress. All wrapped in shiny slogans like net zero, global responsibility, and inclusive growth. But what have we actually got to show for it? Skyrocketing living costs. A strangled economy. Public services on life support. And a political class too busy virtue signaling to rescue the nation they swore to protect. Big net zero or big net neglect? Let's talk about net zero, shall we? Because behind the glossy green branding and photo ops of politicians standing in wind farms, there's a darker reality. Net zero isn't a neutral policy, it's a national transformation. One that's forcing industries to shut down, driving up energy bills, and squeezing the poorest households the hardest. And for what? To meet arbitrary carbon targets while China and India build coal plants by the dozens? It's not a climate strategy, it's a political suicide note. And yet, while pensioners choose between heating and eating, our leaders double down. They call it a moral duty. But morality doesn't pay the gas bill. And it certainly doesn't justify the managed decline of an entire economy. Open borders, closed minds. Now let's get to immigration. Every year, hundreds of thousands of people arrive in the UK. Many legally, many not. And yet, no matter the strain on housing, schools, hospitals, or wages, the answer from Westminster is always the same: we need more. Why? Because cheap labor keeps big business happy. Because demographic engineering keeps the voting base fluid. And because challenging it might be offensive. But the British people? They're fed up. They've been more than patient. And now, they're angry. Who will stop the small boats? Who will reduce immigration? Who will bring law and order back to our streets? Nobody. Not Labour. Not the Conservatives. Not a soul in government. Because here's the horrifying truth: the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as they designed it. No leaders. No plan. No hope? This is where things get truly dystopian. People are no longer asking which party has the answers. They're realizing that none of them do. Let that sink in. When the most popular answer to who will fix this is no one, you know we've entered dangerous territory. The nation feels like it's trapped on a flimsy, disintegrating raft, being tossed around stormy seas, with no captain, no direction, and no rescue in sight. And while the public clings to whatever hope remains, those in charge are arguing about gender pronouns, diversity targets, and how best to please foreign lobbies. Meanwhile, the economy nosedives. Communities decay. Crime surges. The national identity is eroded. We are not just ungoverned. We are deliberately misgoverned. Nobody is listening anymore. This line hits like a gut punch, doesn't it? Because deep down, you know it's true. They don't listen to you. They don't listen when you say enough is enough on immigration. They don't listen when you plead for safer streets. They don't listen when you ask for NHS appointments, lower bills, better schools, secure borders, or actual justice. Instead, they lecture you, blame you, call you backwards or bigoted for even daring to question the direction of the country. You're not just ignored. You're shamed into silence. But not anymore. Britain deserves better, and so do you. You deserve leaders who actually lead. You deserve an economy that serves your family, not foreign interests. You deserve a nation that puts your voice, your values, and your future first. And if you're watching this thinking, I'm tired of this, I want change, then congratulations, you're not alone. Millions feel just like you. Trapped. Forgotten. Betrayed. But awareness is the first weapon. And what you've just seen, the truth laid bare, is the beginning of something bigger. Because once the illusion shatters, once the lies fall apart, all that remains is the power of the people to demand a reckoning. It's time to choose. Do we stay silent while they steer us into the abyss? Or do we speak louder, act faster, and fight back with our voice, our vote, our will? Because they think you won't do anything. They think you'll just complain quietly, carry on paying taxes, and accept the decline. Prove them wrong. If this analysis resonates with you, share it. Comment below. Start the conversation. Because the establishment survives on your silence, but it trembles at your outrage. Make no mistake, a political reckoning is coming. And it starts with you.
Is that the real household disposable income per person will be £500 greater at the end of the Parliament compared with the plans that I inherited. And obviously the last Parliament was the worst on record for living standards. And the OBR confirmed yesterday that real household disposable income will increase in every year of this Parliament. I recognise that the cost of living crisis continues to bite. I'm not complacent about the challenges that families face with their finances.
THE £500 illusion, Labour's prosperity lie exposed. Are you really better off? So there it is. The big promise. The headline-grabbing soundbite. The Chancellor Rachel Reeves looked straight into the camera, stood tall behind her podium, and declared that your household will be £500 better off by the end of this Parliament. Sounds good, doesn't it? Until you stop and ask the one question they're praying you don't. Better off compared to what? Because what Reeves didn't tell you, what she conveniently glossed over, is that this supposed gain is measured against the worst economic period in living memory. She's not lifting you up, she's burying you slightly less deep in the rubble of national decline. And now, it's time to tear apart this facade. £500 better off? Or 500 reasons to distrust this government? Let's put this in perspective. The Chancellor says real household disposable income will increase by £500 by the end of this Parliament. That's her big victory lap. That's what she's hoping you'll latch onto and celebrate. But here's the brutal truth. £500 over 5 years equals £100 per year. That's £8.33 a month. Not even enough to fill your car with fuel. Not enough to cover the rising cost of your energy bill. Not even enough to offset the stealth taxes that this government continues to shove down your throat. And let's not forget, that's before inflation. By the time the price of food, rent, transport and energy finish climbing, that £500 will feel more like pocket change, a statistical illusion with zero real-world value. They're giving you crumbs and expecting a standing ovation. The worst Parliament on record, and Labour's solution? Rachel Reeves admits the last Parliament was the worst on record for living standards. And she's not wrong. But here's what she wants you to forget. Her government is still making it worse. Living standards are still falling. The cost of living is still rising. Public services are still crumbling. Crime is still soaring. Businesses are closing. Households are on life support. So when she smugly tells you that the Office for Budget Responsibility, OBR, has confirmed that incomes will rise every year, she's banking on one thing: your exhaustion. Because if you're too tired, too stressed, too financially battered to dig deeper, you might just accept the lie. You might actually believe that an extra £8 a month is some sign of recovery. But deep down, you know it isn't. The cost of living crisis isn't over, it's escalating. Let's be clear, nothing's getting better. Families are still making impossible choices. Parents are skipping meals so their kids can eat. Working people are queuing at food banks. And yet here comes the Chancellor with a tidy little number meant to distract you from the chaos. She says, "I'm not complacent." But her entire delivery reeked of complacency. It was robotic, rehearsed, hollow. A list of economic platitudes totally divorced from the lived experience of real people. Because if she truly understood what families are going through, she'd know better than to sell £500 over half a decade as some kind of miracle. The £500 smokescreen, what they're not telling you. This isn't about numbers. This is about trust. This is about whether you believe that the same politicians who've overseen the worst collapse in living standards in history now magically have the answers. Reeves wants you to focus on the £500. But let's talk about what she didn't mention. Stealth tax hikes on everything from fuel to pensions. National insurance increases that are strangling small businesses. Soaring food prices, with the average shop up by hundreds per year. Crippling energy bills, despite green subsidies flowing to foreign firms. Rising mortgage payments, driven by failed monetary policy. Rent hikes, council tax hikes, service cuts, all happening now. So tell me, are you feeling this £500 prosperity in your bank account? Or are you still watching your budget with dread every time a new bill lands? Manufactured optimism, real-world misery. This is how the political machine works. They cherry-pick a single data point, polish it, package it, and roll it out in every interview like it's the second coming of economic salvation. They tell you it's confirmed by the OBR to give it credibility. But all the OBR did was project based on Labour's own forecasts based on assumptions, not results. It's like standing in the middle of a collapsing house and proudly announcing that the roof might not fall for another year. And even if it doesn't, you're still drenched, freezing, and surrounded by rubble. Let's talk about the real growth. The only thing that's actually growing in Britain right now? Government bureaucracy, welfare dependency, national debt, political arrogance. Meanwhile, your disposable income, the money you actually live on, is being squeezed from every side. Your freedom to choose, save, build, and provide is shrinking while politicians pretend to hand you a gift. £500 isn't a solution. It's a slap in the face. Ask yourself, are you actually £500 better off? Or are you working more, spending more, and living with less? Do you feel your government is easing your burden or deepening it? Can you trust a political class that celebrates crumbs while your table sits empty? If you're nodding your head right now, you already know the answer. It's time to stop playing along. They count on your silence. They count on your fatigue. They count on the belief that it's just the way things are. But that lie is starting to crack. Because this country belongs to the people, not to spreadsheets, not to spin doctors, and certainly not to politicians trying to gaslight you with cheap figures. You deserve honesty. You deserve dignity. You deserve a real plan, not propaganda. So if you're tired of being insulted by empty promises and imaginary gains, speak up. Share this message. Challenge the narrative. Because if this is what they think counts as progress, then Britain is in far more trouble than they'll ever admit. And if you're not feeling £500 richer, maybe it's time to take £500 worth of action. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Is this economic optimism real, or just a distraction? And make sure to subscribe for more no-nonsense breakdowns that cut through the spin. We see through the lies, and we're not staying silent.
And therefore the pressure needs to go on to Russia to get more seriously to the negotiating table and to have a framework or a deadline, if you like, for responding to what the Ukrainians have already put on the table and what the US is seeking to achieve in their initiative. So I think there's got to be a framework around that. Obviously, we'll discuss that with allies and with the US, but also, and this was a very strong resolve across the room, that now is not the time for pulling back or weakening on sanctions. On the contrary, now is the time for increasing sanctions on Russia to get them to the table to these negotiations, to the hope of a ceasefire and a lasting and secure.
Sanctions, speeches and stale strategy. Starmer's foreign policy fantasy is dragging Britain into crisis. There it is. The great performance. Keir Starmer, suit crisp, delivery cautious, standing before a carefully arranged backdrop of flags and diplomats, speaking slowly, deliberately, about the need for more pressure on Russia. A framework. Sanctions. A long and lasting peace. But let's not get swept up in the theatrics. Because once you strip away the diplomatic fluff and empty phrasing, you're left with something brutally clear. There is no plan. Just rhetoric. Just vague references to frameworks and initiatives and discussions with allies. Meanwhile, Britain burns at home and Starmer plays the statesman on the world stage, pretending to be in control. It's not leadership. It's a distraction. And the British people are not buying it. War words and empty promises. Let's break it down. Starmer says, now is not the time for pulling back, now is the time for increasing sanctions on Russia. He wants you to believe that Britain's path to international influence lies through escalation, through more pressure, more sanctions, more money, more involvement in a war that has already cost thousands of lives and billions in aid. But here's the question nobody in the media seems to be asking. How does any of this actually end? Because when Starmer is asked, he stumbles. He dodges. He utters vague phrases like framework and serious negotiation, but never outlines a clear roadmap. He talks about what the Ukrainians have already put on the table, but never tells us what's on that table, or if Russia is even in the room to read it. This is not diplomacy. This is wishful thinking dressed up in foreign policy language. Sanctions, who really pays? Let's talk about sanctions. Starmer insists that now is the time to increase them. That's the centerpiece of his solution. Ramp up the economic war. Put more pressure on Moscow. Squeeze until they surrender. But here's the reality they don't want you to hear. Sanctions don't just hurt Russia. They hurt you. Yes, you, the British taxpayer. The British worker. The British business owner. Every time new sanctions are imposed, global markets react. Energy prices spike. Trade gets disrupted. Supply chains slow. And who picks up the tab? You do. Your bills go up. Your food costs more. Your businesses pay higher import fees. And while Starmer gives grand speeches in Paris or Brussels, your wages stagnate and your disposable income disappears. Sanctions may weaken Russia's economy, but they are crippling Britain's future in the process. Increased pressure or increased distraction. Here's the part they're hoping you don't notice. Starmer isn't talking about Russia to save Ukraine. He's talking about Russia to save himself. The timing isn't accidental. With the UK economy in shambles, public services collapsing, a cost of living crisis worsening by the day, and trust in government at historic lows, Starmer needs a new narrative. And what better distraction than foreign conflict? It's a classic political move. When things go wrong at home, point abroad. When you can't fix domestic problems, pretend to lead on the international stage. And while the public's attention is turned to military aid and global diplomacy, Labour's economic chaos is buried under the headlines. The price of foreign theatre. Let's talk numbers. Starmer has already pledged billions in loans and grants to Ukraine. Billions more in weapons, ammunition, training programs, and export financing for military manufacturers. But here's the reality back home. NHS waiting lists are still breaking records. Local councils are collapsing under debt. Families are choosing between heating and eating. Small businesses are closing every single day. Over 230,000 firms have gone under since the last budget. And yet Starmer stands there talking about a long and lasting and secure peace. How about a long and lasting future for Britain's people? Where's the peace for the pensioner who can't afford the bus fare? Where's the security for the family struggling to pay rent? Where's the leadership for the millions of Britons drowning under taxes, inflation, and government indifference? No plan. No roadmap. No accountability. You heard it yourself. There was no strategy. No timeline. No definition of success. Just vague suggestions about talking to allies, applying pressure, and hoping for negotiations. Hope? Hope is not a policy. Hope is not a peace plan. Hope is not leadership. Starmer wants to project calm. He wants to look confident. But when pushed for specifics, his mask slips, and all that's left is a hollow man, echoing slogans in a collapsing room. And you're supposed to be grateful? While the Prime Minister sends your money overseas, you're expected to clap. You're told Britain is playing a vital role in world affairs. But what about your role? What about the people who get up at 6 a.m., pay their taxes, follow the rules, and still can't get ahead? This isn't about being anti-Ukraine. This is about priorities. Britain is bleeding, financially, socially, and institutionally, and Starmer is too busy playing the part of international negotiator to notice. We are a nation being led by a man more focused on posturing in Paris than fixing potholes in Preston. So let's ask the real questions. Where does this war end, Prime Minister? How much more will we pay? How many more billions will vanish overseas before Britain itself gets rescued? And why do you talk about long-term peace abroad when your own citizens don't feel safe at home? You know what the answers are. You know they don't have a plan. You know they're not listening. Britain deserves more than words. This isn't leadership. It's performance. And it's falling apart. So if you're tired of being fed recycled speeches and empty slogans, if you're sick of being told now is not the time to fix the problems right in front of our faces, it's time to make some noise. Comment below. Share this message. Talk to your friends. Demand better. Because the world doesn't need another actor reading from a script. It needs a leader who puts Britain first. And right now, that leader is nowhere in sight.